I actually really wanted to come back and sent an email, please have me back. And so I'm excited to be here. And it's going to be great to meet all of you. I can't see any of you, but I know that you're out there. Okay. My presentation is titled 1959 because right now I'm curating a show of artists who, along with me, were born in 1959. It's an odd cusp year between the baby boomer hippies and the Gen X punks. Many of us felt like as though we were born too late, but at the same time too early. But I like to think of it as the year that Barbie was born, and it was also the year that the Guggenheim Museum opened. So I put together this is a brand new presentation. I put it together for this. It has a bit of a backstory, but some of the dates might be a little bit off, but it's close enough. Okay, so
one more time, just closer.
Am I
not? You're good. Try it again.
Okay.
No, don't whisper.
Okay. Can you hear me now? I'll do it like Jackie Kennedy. Well, okay. Like most of you, probably, I've been interested in art since since early childhood. I grew up on the shore in Stonington, Connecticut, where I spent a lot of time doing odd things, like cutting images out of newspapers and magazines and keeping them in folders, randomly typing notes and keeping and hiding journals, making do-it-yourself projects, home projects inspired by a fantastic book called Make Something from Nothing. But in terms of considering myself an artist, I'm a bit of a late bloomer. After high school, where I got into some trouble during art class for making a children's mobile with dangerous objects, I got a BA in art history from Tufts and worked for several years as a magazine designer. Eventually, I realized it wasn't for me and went back to school and began painting in earnest in my late 20s. The day I graduated from Mass Art, I packed up my car and moved to New York. I decided to paint for at least a year before trying to show my work. This is the point at which I came here. I began making small abstract constructions using a jigsaw, paint, and 1/4-inch plywood cobbled together with small nails and wire. The pieces were rudimentary and consciously haphazard. While I was learning to paint at Mass Art, Frank Stella gave a series of lectures at Harvard that were published in this book called Working Space. His ideas about paintings as objects emerging into the viewer's space rather than creating the illusion of three-dimensionality within the picture plane still resonate with me. I've always intuitively regarded paintings primarily as objects rather than images, and Stella's thinking clarified and lent intellectual articulation to my instincts. The fact that he wrote his ideas down and published a book was also influential in my development of Two Coats of Paint, a blog I write and publish, as George mentioned, that considers painting and related subjects. Like Mel Bachner, Mira Shore, Jack Tworkov, Elaine de Kooning, and so many others before me, I have become an artist who also writes. We're getting to more pictures soon. 2 years after I graduated, I had a studio in a forlorn Brooklyn neighborhood called Dumbo, living off a Pollock Krasner grant and supporting myself as a part-time production artist at several New York magazines, National Lampoon, Esquire, Condé Nast Traveler, Manhattan Ink, and Vogue. And I liked working for them because I only had to work 2 weeks each month. Eventually, when the stock market crashed, the magazines, and this is a story that you'll probably have all lived through at different times in your careers. Eventually, when the stock market crashed, the magazines stopped using freelancers, so I had to come up with another plan. Getting an MFA wasn't as routine as it is today, and after a lot of thought, I applied to MFA program at the University of Connecticut, where they gave each of the 5 artists a teaching assistantship that included a small stipend. So I thought it would be like a 2-year residency program where I could ride out the down market. But of course, as those of you who have been to grad school know, it's a little bit more challenging than that. I worked with wonderful faculty, printmakers Laurie Sloan and Gus Mazzacca, and painters Catherine Myers and Deborah Dancy, ceramicist Walter McConnell. this is a piece called Quarto. Oh, it's got the title on there. Okay. Naturally, in bucolic Stores, Connecticut, now I can see everyone. Okay. It was just the dark slides. Okay, naturally, in bucolic Stores, Connecticut, landscape imagery began to emerge in my paintings. I began working on larger canvases, and when I graduated in my early 30s, I split my time between a barn in Stonington and a loft in Williamsburg, which at the time was a vibrant outpost for a slew of painters whose work was out of favor. I remember in the 1990s, critics were beginning to say that painting was dead, but it definitely wasn't. Galleries weren't interested in showing it, and critics weren't interested in writing about it, but artists kept making it, and we all lived in Williamsburg. For the next few years, I made multi-panel pieces that combined Ellsworth Kelly's objectness and presence with dark Barbizon school landscapes that recalled the rural view from my childhood bedroom. Kelly, Maura Dreyer, George Innes, and minimalist seriality and grids were touchstones during this period. Slapdash construction had marked my earlier shaped constructed abstractions, which I don't have any images of, I'm sorry. I was more meticulous in constructing this new body of work because I was obsessed with the meaning of object and surface. I selected wood from the lumberyard and made the physical supports carefully by hand, building surfaces with thin layers of modeling paste and gesso, which I then sanded. The process of making the support became as important as the highly varnished image I was painting on the front. I had a few solo shows at a now long-gone gallery in Soho, which at the time was the biggest gallery neighborhood for emerging artists. After 6 or 7 years, though, landscape imagery seemed too easy. I wanted to make work that was more challenging. The gallery I had been working with worried that innovation would hinder the ability to sell the work, but then, after 9/11, they closed, and so I felt freer to explore new directions. I had a baby, which meant I needed more money, and I took a tenure-track position at a small state university in Connecticut, where I began to explore more experimental approaches. I disavowed the landscape imagery because I felt like it was a crutch, and started making diagrammatic drawings of objects from everyday life: cars, coffee makers, weed whackers, binoculars, paint buckets. Ooh, there we go. I've been in the wrong spot all this time. Paint buckets, rolls of tape, and so forth. I liked the matter-of-factness of the drawings, which I made in Illustrator on the computer. It was the late 90s, and so digital printing was still in its infancy and very limited. Where'd it go? Lost it again. I explored output strategies, printing the images on old drawings, pages from books, and photographs. For larger pieces, I tiled them out in sections on my inkjet printer and pieced them together to make 4x5 foot color prints. This one is a terrible slide, but it's called Baby Food. And you can see on the right is a landscape image. It's a landscape sideways on paper, sewn together with this diagram of a baby food jar. This one's called Clamp Lamps, also printed on top of a watercolor of a landscape. And this one is called Louise Bourgeois, because I don't know why, but it says it in the upper in one of the pages. They were just sort of pages from my sketchbook that I printed on top of. In 2004, though, I lost my barn studio and had no choice but to embrace what we now think of as a post-studio practice. During this period, I began writing, fiction mostly, explored digital projects and installation. Essentially, I adapted to making work that didn't require a permanent space. It was a good experience. I began engaging with the world in a way that working in an isolated studio didn't allow. And here's a book. It's called Dung. This is just the cover. And then it says sort of, that means fiction in German. And that's a picture of me with a goiter. It was a Photoshop. And it was actually, the book was a series of sort of information graphics having to do with my life. And they were accompanied by short fictive passages. But my most memorable projects involved Moby Dick because I was living in Mystic, after all, home of the last surviving whaling ship, the Charles W. Morgan. One project was called Search for Moby Dicks, which was an essay in PowerPoint form that chronicled my travels to places called Moby Dick. I think the notion of the search is meaningful to most artists, and at the time I was thinking about content for painting. And this is the Moby Dick lounge, the sign for the Moby Dick Lounge along the highway in New Jersey, near those big oil tanks. Okay, after a 3-year hiatus in 2007, I returned to painting, and that's when I started Two Coats of Paint. On the most straightforward level, I was living in Connecticut and felt disconnected to the art world I knew in Brooklyn. I also wanted to catch up with the contemporary conversation on painting, and I created the blog to share reviews, commentary, news, and background information about painting and related subjects. It was a digest format at that point. But I think it also provided a way to reaffirm the vitality of painting for me, for other artists, for painters, critics, and galleries too. And you know, it's expanded now. There's other social media. Here's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And then advertising. Now, it used to be, when I started it, it was supported with my university salary. Now it's supported exclusively through advertising. I moved from a reader supported model this past year because I really would rather have the galleries support it rather than put the onus on the artist to support it. So here are some of the ads I've had this past year. If you're interested in advertising, just send a note to twocoatsofpaint@gmail.com with advertising in the subject line. And if you're having a show, encourage your gallery to support independent art writing through these through advertising. That's my sales pitch. Over 12 years, Two Coats has grown and has become an outlet for my own critical views about painting. One of the country's more recognized, did I really say that about myself? I'll just skip that part. It must have come out of my biography. But it's become an integral part of my art practice. And today, I don't think anyone would ever suggest that painting isn't alive and well. At the same time, I had returned to painting, as I said, and this was sort of a transition piece. It was one of those digital diagrams, but of an observation tower. So in 2006, I started a series of spare abstract paintings based on the visual language of fire towers. Appropriating the small size, this is 18 by 24, and pictorial language from abstract easel paintings of the post-war era. You know, as an art history major, I think of different styles and eras as languages for me to use. I documented the series in my first artist book, produced through On-Demand Publishing, and it's called Keeping Our Distance, the Tower Paintings, and it has an essay that I wrote for the Blogger show. Martin Bromirsky is here. I think you were in that show, weren't you? And so there was an essay that I took and then combined with images and made this book. And now I usually make books for most of my shows or projects. Okay, that year I also accepted Simon Draper's invitation to participate in Habitat for Artists, which was a residency in Beacon, New York. Draper created dozens of tiny 4-by-5-foot sheds and invited several artists to work in them for the summer. During the residency, I created over 30 small, colorful, angular abstractions on wood inspired by the shed architecture. And this is my shed before the roof was complete. But he asked us to put things on the outside so that when we weren't there, people could walk by and see the type of work we were making. So mine was special because I had that little veranda out front. They didn't all have the veranda there. I think their scale of the paintings I'm talking about now, the scale, handmade quality, and intuitive form coalesced as an unexpected response to the cerebral and exhaustive exploration of mathematical and geometric constructs showcased at nearby Beacon, where I found refuge in rolling thunderstorms during a sweltering heat wave. I was taken by Amy Knoebel and Blinky Palermo's paintings. And here's an installation. It was a reconstructed project called 24 Paintings for Blinky Palermo, made by Amy Knoebel. And then here's one of my paintings that I made during that period. And it's small, it's, I don't know, probably 10 by 12 or something. the beacon paintings and the Habitat residency led to other unusual projects. Through writing, both on the blog and for the Brooklyn Rail, I found my way back to the art community in New York. Here's a cover of the book I made of that project using an essay from the Brooklyn Rail, and then Simon wrote an essay too. And we just had a little bit of a book about the project. In 2009, I was invited to be an artist in residence at Austin Thomas's Pocket Utopia, one of the first galleries in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn, where I worked on a series of sketchbooks that became the basis. Here are some of the sketchbooks that became the basis for a new visual language. I chronicled the residency on Tumblr with my first iPhone. So that was exciting. I don't know if anybody remembers Tumblr, but Vine, Pinterest, so many things we've loved and lost. Okay, so here's an image of the sketchbooks. Here's some of the inside pages. These are collages made with, they're just pages from Art Forum. And the new work, based on the sketchbooks, explored off-kilter composition and discordant out-of-the-tube colors with the visual language that referenced everyday objects and imagery like ships and bottles, car dealer flags, construction materials, mind maps, fireworks, floor plans. The number 8, geometric motifs from my father's old paintings, vomit, page-like cross-hatching. So here's one of those paintings. I called them the brightly colored separate paintings. 2010 was a good year. I was promoted to full professor, and Two Coats of Paint was named among the top 10 art blogs by the International Association of Art Critics in the United States, and won a Mindshare Award for art blog excellence. Whoops, thought I had another painting image. Sorry. Okay, this is just some pictures of what Bushwick looked like back then. It's much different now. It's a lot more developed and gentrified. But it used to just be, you'd see things on the side of the street where clearly some artist or someone had moved out of their apartment and they just left everything out on the street. Here's some, this was just a broken piece in the subway. Oops, come back, there you are. Here's another one. Here's another one of the brightly colored separates. They were in a show at Bushwick Gallery called Storefront Bushwick. I think it was Storefront Bushwick. It was curated by Harag Vartanian, who now is the editor at Hyperallergic. So not long after, I'd been thinking about a trend I'd been seeing in the galleries, what I called casualism, and published an article, sort of a controversial article about it in the Brooklyn Rail. It reflected in Raphael Rubinstein's 2009 essay on provisional painting. The casualist tendency is not about contingency so much as it is about making things by hand, valuing low-tech approaches, nurturing untidiness, and imperfection, or what is it, Martin? Wabi-sabi. Thanks. The essay drew on my artist statement, and despite opposition from traditionalists who worried that casualism was killing painting, the ideas kind of gained traction. This is just a studio shot. I was subletting space at the Elizabeth Foundation in New York. And then these are some pieces I was working on. This is just unstretched linen with silver spray paint. Lots of unfinished space. Having left my teaching job, I was able to devote more time to the blog and therefore to publish longer and more original pieces. And Two Coats of Paint won a Creative Capital Warhol Foundation grant for arts writing that year, which enabled me to teach less and paint more. Oh, that is there. I thought I took this one out. This one's called a Uniqlo. I moved to a Bushwick studio where I had an amazing view of industrial HVAC units. And I say that in all sincerity. It really was an amazing view. I mean, look at those HVAC units. Do you see the 5 of them, the square ones there? I mean, it looks like something out of Dia Beacon. So the ideas from this period culminated in a solo show at Pocket Utopia, which had relocated to Lower East Side. It was called Precisionist Casual, and as well as some group shows in Seattle, New York, Paris, and Chicago. All right, here's a wall in the studio, and actually, since I was working on unstretched canvas, I would just pin them up like this, and I ended up liking it so much that I used it in installations in exhibitions to hang them this way. This one is 72 by 84 inches on unstretched canvas, and I was using acrylic paint from Guerra Paint at the time because you could get these highly pigmented. You mix the paint yourself. This one's called Cement Chute, also unstretched. And here's another one on a scrap of a linen tarp. And then I made a book that went with these called 117 Groton Street for a show that I had at Real Artways in Hartford. It was pictures of the Bushwick neighborhood because I wanted people to see where these paintings were coming from. During Hurricane Sandy, which was sort of shortly thereafter, I had a winter rental in the shoreline in southeastern Connecticut where several ships broke their moorings, ran aground, sails were shredded, houses were flooded, propane tanks and gas grills floated down the street, events that still have an effect on my images and use of materials. And I did a series of paintings of gas grills. This one has been around the world. It was at a show in England, and I don't know, I think it's like 72 by 84 inches. And this was a small piece on linen tarp with lots of mending and frayed edges. Over this period, my work had become so reductive, though, that I wanted to begin moving in a different direction. I wondered what it might mean to overwork a painting, to work long past any point of resolution. If the earlier work had been about beginnings, what might a hopelessly unsuccessful ending look like? I reintroduced color into my work, began drawing with more recognizable imagery, attaching objects, and simply getting more paint on the canvas. Or that was my goal. I sublet a studio in Dumbo that had big white walls and a white cement floor. The size and whiteness of the walls affected the work. I made the series of bright 72 by 84 inch paintings on unstretched canvas. Commuting to the studio on my bike, I rode from my apartment near 96th Street in Manhattan, down the Hudson River bike path, past all the soccer fields, playgrounds, and basketball courts, through Soho, Chinatown, and over the Manhattan Bridge to Dumbo. Surrounded by the city in such an intimate level, I began painting more loosely and incorporating curving lines, bright colors, sports field, t-shirt scraps I found on the rack at the Salvation Army. This one was one of the first ones, and here we're in 2014. It's called Fence Ball Field, and the actual paint is on the other side, and the other side has tons of paint on it, but I was still drawn to this unpainted look because when I looked at the back, I said, no, this is so much better. So the back became the front. So I intended to put more paint on, but it never worked out that way. And then this is the smaller piece on canvas, unfinished canvas, using t-shirts. It's called Jumble. And this one is World Cup. After years of working without a permanent studio, I was invited to participate in the Two Trees Cultural Space Subsidy Program in Dumbo, where I've been working for the past 4 years. And here was the studio when I first moved in. And people said, oh, now that you have a studio, what are you going to do? And the first thing I did was to get some stretchers. You know, I had grown accustomed to the unstretched, and it became part of my aesthetic and became part of the content of the work, and I just wondered what would happen if I worked on stretched canvas again. So I was advertising. I had an advertiser who made stretchers, so we traded. And they sat in the studio for like 6 months before I could actually bring myself to use them. It's Jared Preston, if anyone's looking. He's too busy for me now, though. Last time I called him, he said, oh, I can't get to that. Okay, so the first thing I did was, I also returned to oil paint, which I hadn't used in a long time. And working with oil paint on stretch canvas was really like returning to a long-lost love. But it took a while to develop the new content. I spent a residency at Yaddo in 2015 thinking about surface and color working on a book project related to Goethe's color theory, and continuing to use imagery inspired by everyday life, particularly online life, the stock market, which I was thinking about when I signed my 3-year lease, like what if I put all this money into the stock market? Other people's writing, driving, I love driving, I call it my superpower, and more. I began working with Stephanie Theodore at her beautiful gallery in Bushwick. If anybody is familiar with Bushwick, it's in that 56 Bogart Street building, and I really think it's the best gallery in the neighborhood. So this one is called Goethe's Color Triangle. Here's, oops, wrong button, Cyber Cave. These are all 18 by 24, or no, sorry, 16 by 20. This one's called Fever. I was thinking a lot about the Ebola virus back then in 2015. I don't know if you remember, but there was the Ebola scare. But somehow it seemed like we had good people in charge, and it didn't go any further than the countries in, was it Congo? I can't remember. Okay, and then this one is called July Roadtrip, and I did a lot of paintings with the images of tail lights, which is something you see a lot of when you drive. After showing this body of work at Stephanie's, I began noodling on a series of digital drawings, geometric and abstract, and I posted them on Instagram every morning. It was going to be a short-term project, 30 days, to be the basis for a book I wanted to make. But honestly, I'm still making them 3 years later. And here's it's at Sharon_Butler. And I tagged them all SB Good Morning Drawings. And it used to have an exclamation point, and I thought of it sort of ironically. But then after the election in 2016, I just couldn't do it anymore. So now they're just the SB Good Morning Drawings. And so this is a grid of them. Now, here's a closer version. You know, these are made in a phone app. People are always asking me, where are they? Where can I see them? How big are they? And what is the medium? And honestly, I say, this is it. They're made in a phone app. And that's all it is. So what's the phone app, everyone asks? And I say, it's PixArt. And I only use the geometric tools. The square, the rounded corner square, the circle, the triangle, and the diamond. Fill, stroke. It's really more of a Photoshop Lite program than it is a drawing program. But I always say it doesn't really matter what program, if you want to start drawing on your phone, it's not really about the program you choose, it's about choosing any program and then doing you in the program. Okay, so naturally the drawings became the basis for a new series of paintings. The project, I don't want to talk about that yet. Okay, so this was the first painting. It's called Tutorial. It's 68 by 84 inches. It's on one of those stretchers that we saw in the other image. This was like the painting that sat in the studio, and every day I would do something to it. And I've never shown it because it's thick and crusty with paint, and it doesn't fit in with anything else. But this is where so many ideas were announced to me that showed up in other work. You know, so I like to show this because I think of it as the tutorial for all the work that came after that. These are not based on any particular drawings, but they're based on the language of the digital drawings. And so this one's called Stacks from 2017, also 68 by 84 inches. This one is out in Seattle. I haven't figured out how to get it back yet. I think I'm going to go on a road trip out there this summer, though. So the drawings became the basis for a new series of paintings. The project is existential in nature, like Ann Kawara's date paintings or Lois Dodd's daily painting practice. Looking at the grid view on Instagram shows how visual ideas and symbolic meaning develop over time. There we go. Develop over time. A personal language, a code has evolved, and some combinations of shapes have specific meaning to me. Not that viewers need to know, but the diamond usually indicates some sort of crisis. It may have been a day that my daughter, who got swept up in the opioid crisis, was in the emergency room. Or used more recently, it might mean that one of her friends has died of an overdose. She's been in recovery for more than a year. I always have to say this because people gasp and then they worry but she's been in recovery for more than a year, but the process has been pretty terrifying. At the same time that she began to struggle 3 years ago, it also seemed that the world as we know it is coming apart. So it's sort of ironic, or not ironic, I don't even know what the word is, but at the same time that the world is falling apart, my life was kind of falling apart. But the drawings are very much made not with a specific meaning, but in the moment and often very early in the morning, often 4:30, 5 o'clock, without much forethought. It's not as though I sit down and think I'm going to make a drawing about this or that. And then up at Yaddo this past summer, I was ready to move on from these. I thought I had done everything I could do. But I started making paintings of specific drawings that had particular meaning. So for instance, here's one. The original drawing was made on December 24th, 2016. I made it in 2008, so it's a little bit confusing with the title there. It's oil on canvas board. Canvas board is a very, very much like comfort food to me. You know, it's a size and a material that I feel completely at ease with. I'm not challenged by the material, so I could really just meditate on what had happened. Where the drawings were made in the moments, the paintings were a much longer meditation, both in selecting them and the making of them. And here's another one. This one is at Martin Bermersky's house. This is March 1, 2017. May 20, 2018. October 13th, 2016. And they have these French cleats on the back, because you know, if you paint on canvas board, it's very hard. Do you frame it? How are you going to present it? Do you put nails in it? And so I made French cleats for the back. And so they kind of hover on the wall. And I think it was actually somebody who came up to Yaddo suggested it, and I thought it was a really good idea. And then this is my final slide, or not my, almost my final slide. This is the drawing I made this morning, April 8th, 2019. And I wasn't really thinking about it, but as I was putting this together, I was struck by how similar this looks to some of the tower paintings from years ago. But currently, I'm working on 2 series with the paintings that I haven't photographed yet. The first, I've kind of moved beyond my own personal trauma. The first one is of the most popular drawings. And the other is of the least popular drawings as determined by Instagram viewers. Popularity and our desire to be popular in an age of social media, I think it's fascinating. And my favorite drawings are rarely the ones that other people find are, give the thumbs up. So they're rarely the most popular. And this is today's. For me then, to sum up, making art and writing has always been about documenting life and ideas, about making sense of emotional experience. At every age, I've been keenly aware of wanting to remember. That's it. That's all I got.